Dan, I don't know what you're hearing this morning, but I checked in with some sources in Jerusalem, and they were at the beach this morning. They've been told that possibly this 24-hour warning timeline for more strikes has been pushed back, and one of the reasons is this agreement with Hamas. So can you tell us what's going on there and if you think that's impacting the timeline?
Well, if your sources, when they're not wearing bathing suits or wearing military uniforms, it's worth pointing out that the beach is only about a 12 or 15-minute drive from military headquarters in Tel Aviv. Presumably, they could be dressed and back in action at short notice. The Israelis say they have been poised to resume their war on Iran if asked to by the United States or if attacked directly by Iran. So, beach or not, I think the Israelis, if indeed these leaked reports to American media are true, would be ready to pitch in very short order. And we shouldn't rule out a resumption of that war. Significantly, I think these reports have emerged just a couple days after the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu returned from a much-watched visit to Washington. There was some speculation at the outset that sparks would fly between him and the US President Trump, given their quite public divisions over the course of the war in recent weeks and months. There was certainly no evidence of that during the meeting, and we may discover, if these leaks prove true, that if anything, they were there to decide jointly on the next course of action, on the resumption of joint military action against Iran. It's worth remembering that previous meeting on February 11th came just over 2 weeks before that war was launched on February 28th. Anything can go, but as you noted, in parallel, there has been a development, declarative nonetheless, but still dramatic, in Gaza. Gaza is the ground zero of this multi-front regional war that Israel's been waging for 2.5 years. Arguably, the United States would not now be at war with Iran were it not for Hamas, that Iranian-Palestinian ally attacking Israel on October 7, 2023, and unfurling that regional conflict. It now appears Hamas has declaratively, nominally agreed to disarm. There is a bit of a hedging to that statement. Nonetheless, it's a significant step forward. It's being held as such by international mediators, by the international consortium known as the Board of Peace, that's meant to implement President Trump's vision for post-war reconstruction and reconciliation in Gaza and between Gaza and Israel. That's definitely worth watching, though the Israelis have been quietly expressing misgivings. We'll be watching tomorrow when Netanyahu convenes his cabinet to see if there's a formal acceptance of what's being called the roadmap into the Trump peace plan.
We'll get back to what the president is calling an historic agreement here in just a minute, Dan, but I want to stick with the visit that Prime Minister Netanyahu made to Washington. You were along on that trip as well, and I should say concision was the name of the game in terms of official readouts of that meeting in the White House. But Prime Minister Netanyahu did speak to ABC News afterward. Let's take a listen to what he had to say just about what he and the president discussed.
He's got basically three options. One, to indeed succeed in making a deal. Two, to continue the blockade. Three, to take military action. Anything that will produce the end of Iran's nuclear program is what we want. That's our common goal. We actually analyzed all three possibilities, and I thought we did it in an open way between friends and allies, and it's his decision.
Dan, we hear the Prime Minister there underscoring the friendship between him and the President of the United States, talking about the analysis that the both of them did during that meeting in the White House. How closely aligned are they? You mentioned that cabinet meeting taking place tomorrow. Your sense of sort of what's likely to come about it vis-a-vis this conflict?
If you're referring to Gaza, Netanyahu's in a bind. He's up for re-election in some 3 months. This Gaza plan calls for an Israeli withdrawal as part of the decommissioning of Hamas arms. And the interim plan, the problem with the Gaza plan is published by Trump in October of last year, when the ceasefire in Gaza was achieved, was that the only real detail was over the return of hostages, the increase in humanitarian aid, and the cessation of major combat. Everything else was very much bare bones, broad brush, if you like. Now we're approaching the small print, and the small print is meant to bring together sides that really don't want to be brought together. That's especially true for Hamas. It's an existential situation for Hamas. It faces destruction one way or the other, and it's trying to salvage what it can. So it's saying it won't withdraw, or I should say, sorry, won't give up its weapons without an Israeli withdrawal, without an Israeli commitment to Palestinian statehood. All of that is in the Trump plan. The question is scope and sequencing. Hamas Hamas is trying to front load this deal, its agreement to give up some of its weapons, heavy weapons, not small arms at this point, to major concessions by Israel. That really isn't borne out by a reading of the Trump plan. But if you, and certainly not by statements by the US president himself, he said a withdrawal would follow a decommissioning, a demilitarization of the Gaza Strip. Nonetheless, everyone involved here, I imagine even the Israelis, so Netanyahu may not want to say that publicly, don't want this effort to die. It is significant. They don't want it to wither on the vine. So Netanyahu has to thread the needle between keeping this initiative going, keeping Hamas on the road to disarmament, while not alienating his right-wing allies and his electorate with obvious moves that could be construed as Israeli withdrawal, Israeli redeployment, and Israel not itself receiving the weapons that Hamas plans to give up. Under the plans published this week, Hamas would effectively put them in escrow. Decommissioning, meaning they put them in storage, out of reach officially, but under the control of a future recognized and verified and approved Palestinian administration. I think many Israelis had images of piles of rifles being picked up in the middle of the street, loaded onto the back of Israeli trucks. That's not going to happen.
Dan, are you going to get your take on this? Because as you mentioned, Israel has not officially commented on this deal yet. The other thing that stands out to me is you mentioned sequencing. There is a bit of a sequencing here because you get this Gaza announcement after you had this Saudi nuclear agreement get agreed to, and then you had President Trump come out and say they can't have the nuclear deal until they normalize relationship with Gaza. The Saudi Crown Prince has said he can't do that until there's a deal for the Palestinians. Do we think this is all tied in, that all of a sudden we're getting a push on normalization here or a solution for the Gaza issue?
It well could be. There are people in the US administration, there are people in the Israeli government who are thinking big picture. Again, I think the immediate need or the immediate desire of any of the people, the stakeholders, would be to achieve actual peace or an abating of these hostilities. But there would be a political payoff, an electoral payoff. As I said, Netanyahu's up for re-election. The US president is looking at midterms in November. If he could bring, a ceremony, a signing ceremony or a handshake ceremony on the White House lawns to those elections, it could help him, though invariably such elections come down to domestic policy. It wouldn't hurt him, given that he really is adrift in this Iran war, at least to be able to hold up a peace deal to counterbalance that in terms of the imaging of his foreign policy, his handling of foreign affairs. So there may be something tied together here. I think what we've seen with Trump is he does like coming out with the major declarations of achievements, even though they haven't been fully signed onto by all the parties. I think he likes to will the achievement into reality by basically, should we say, corralling people publicly into either going along what he's declared or publicly defying him. That may be the case in Gaza when it comes to the Saudi nuclear deal that you cited. The Israelis weren't happy with its announcement. They felt that they weren't properly consulted on it at this stage. As you noted, the US president said after the announcement, some hours or I think a day later, that the Saudis would have to recognize Israel. Much comes down to whether they will actually be able in the future under this deal to enrich uranium. That is not an immediate part of the deal. That's what all sides will focus on.
Dan